All right, it is week 5, and you are listening to the Beyond Unreal podcast. I am the White Dragon.
And this is Sir Briz.
All right, so a lot of interesting things happened this week. I want to start with a couple of community announcements. First thing is there is a new channel for Pugs. It is 2K4 Pugs. What they've done is they've taken a bunch of the Pug channels and kind of consolidated them, so you can join CTF, Team Deathmatch, TAM, 1v1, 2v2, all from within the same channel. I've played a couple of matches this week already, and I'm going to be including some of the footage in this episode. So if you want to play, that's where you should go. And of course, on that note, we also have the Beyond Unreal channel, and there's a lot of discussion going on in there about the game. I highly recommend, if you want to talk to people real time, that you head there.
Yeah, the people in the Beyond Unreal channel. This is on Global Gamers, by the way. The people in the Beyond Unreal channel have been talking almost daily about the development of Unreal Tournament and the specific things that Epic is asking for feedback on, like movement is something that we've talked about a lot in there, for example.
The next thing is I also wanted to give a quick plug for the Unreal Tournament subreddit. This is a really great way to filter information so that we can show Epic what we think is important, what we think is good content. And it's also a really good way to promote the game. So there's going to be a lot of people that don't visit the forum every day, but they visit Reddit every day. So the more subscribers we can get on that subreddit, better able we will be later on to promote the game.
Yep, and on that same note, there's the Unreal Tournament forum on Beyond Unreal.
Yes.
And if you want to talk to other people in the Beyond Unreal community about Unreal Tournament, that's a good place to go as well.
And the Beyond Unreal forum is a much more focused discussion. So there's some, even though there's not nearly as much content there, it's still a really good place to go and look and be active in.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into the changes that they made this week. There was a lot of commits, mostly content stuff, sounds.
There were probably some weapon balance tweaks and stuff like that, and there was definitely some changes to the deathmatch HUD and some timers and some pickup based stuff, but there was, in terms of the core gameplay, really no movement this week.
Yeah, I think part of that might have been that Steve Polge was out on vacation this week. Any big gameplay affecting decisions, it looks like they put off a little bit.
Yep.
Some other things is there is some stuff on the pickup bases. Entropy made a thread looking for some suggestions on the pickup bases, and it looks like they're kind of trending towards the idea of that you'll have a much better idea of when a power-up is actually going to spawn.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of ideas in there. Personally, one of my favorite ideas is this one where the pickup base glows when the pickup is gone until it respawns, and based on what color it is and how bright it is, that's how you know, have a general idea of when it's going to come back. There's been a lot of conversation around how that's dumbing down the game and all this different stuff, but I think that some kind of effect there that is on by default needs to happen. And the other thing too is that I personally feel like something like having the pickup base glow or something like that adds a little bit more depth to the game, because precise timing isn't as necessary of a skill outside of the 1v1 game mode. But the other aspect of that is just making pickups contestable. Like right now, if somebody has really good timing and another person just has average timing, they're
going to get the pickup every time.
Yeah, and it's hard for somebody to say, well, I'll wait around this pickup or try to ambush this pickup at a certain point, because they don't know when it's coming back. So some kind of way to know how far away the pickup time is, even if it's a mushy light emitter or something like that, I think that adds an element of, you know, somebody's going to probably be coming by this point at around this time. Right. And turns it into a contest.
I've always felt that the skill in timing pickups is not in timing the pickup itself. I'm sorry, but it doesn't take much skill to press a button to start a timer when you pick up the pickup. It just doesn't. And if you can offload that skill to an external program, it's probably not a compelling skill to begin with. But what is a compelling skill is when both players know when the pickup is going to come, what decisions do they make? Do I let him have it because I'm not in a good position? Do I get really aggressive? Can I kill him while he's trying to pick up the pickup?
Yep.
How do I actually utilize the pickup once I have it? Yep. Those are the compelling skill mechanics. And I think that the quicker you can get to that particular part of the game, the better. That's why I'm personally in favor of anything you can do to make it so that I know exactly when the pickup is going to show up. I'm in favor of it. The thing that they have where it's like a clock that turns around, I think that's great. It looks like crap.
Yeah.
And they're going to need to make it look better. But something where I know exactly when it's going to show up, I would be totally cool with it.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people hate that sort of a thing, and it's going to get modded out either way.
Yeah.
But I'm going to play with that on. I think that will make the game more fun, even in a hyper competitive atmosphere.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I'm a little more mushy on precision, but knowing when you're close to a pickup spawning, I think is really important. So a mechanic that they added in UT3 was the pickup base flashing about 3 seconds before it came. I don't think that went far enough, but it did have the effect of making some item pickups contestable. Like, if you saw the base flashing, then you knew that within a certain range of time, somebody that was timing well was going to be coming by that spot, and you could turn that into a battle. I'm sorry to the 1v1 community that loves running around instead of fighting, but combat is way more interesting to watch than 2 people running around a map perfectly timing item spawns.
Ouch, that stung. Yeah, so we weren't planning on going into this, but man, this is something I feel really strongly about. Watching Fatality in 2003 hide around in compressed for 5 minutes was stupid. Get rid of that. Let's make 1v1 about fighting again.
Yes.
All right, so let's move on now that I've stood on my soapbox. They also accepted their first pull request. They added these jump pads.
Yeah, and the jump pads are real cool. If you haven't seen them, there's a thread, I think, in the game design forum. Basically, in the editor, you can say what vector you want the jump pad to go, and it shows you an arrow where that vector points to, which is really nice. And so Tim A made some videos. They're basically showing, here's how it looks in the editor, here's how it looks in the game, and he even had an example of, here's a level where you can hit a jump pad and it bounces you around the entire level, which was really cool.
This gets into the other big news that they announced this week, which is that they are giving the community a challenge to make weapons. They have most of the weapons in the game already, but they're all blueprint weapons. And what they're asking the community to do is to go and make them in native C++ code.
Yep.
Now, the reason that's related to the jump pad is that the jump pads give you the perfect example of how to do that. The reason that they pulled that in was because it was a fairly uncontroversial change that needed to be in the game, and it was done really, really well.
Yep.
That jump pad is extremely flexible. You can use it in a lot of different places. It's really easy to use, and that's what they want for the weapons too. They want to be able to blueprint those weapons and be able to change them in many different ways.
Yep. And the other thing is that this pull request gives you the perfect framework for how to submit a pull request.
Yes.
Because Epic's never going to go into the pull request system and pull changes in and figure out exactly what you changed and how it should operate. Okay, you need to maybe open a pull request, but step 1 should always be, let's start a thread in the correct forum. Step 2, create videos that show exactly what your change does. So if you're creating a weapon, you should be showing videos of, here's how my weapon operates, and here's how shock combo works, etc. The speed of the shock bolt, whatever. And getting a lot of community feedback, because the community is partially responsible for these jump pads getting in. People were sending messages to Epic employees saying, go check out these jump pads, they're awesome. So basically, it got to the point where Epic couldn't ignore that pull request anymore because so many people were talking about it.
It's going to be interesting to see how the community steps up to this challenge. We're still kind of getting our feet underneath of us. There's a lot of stuff to learn. The tutorials and like the community knowledge about those things is still in its infancy. So there's going to be a lot of work, but I think that we're going to see a lot of really interesting weapons come out in the next week once people figure out how to do it.
Yeah. And that kind of stuff will lead to more people getting involved. That's kind of the direction that I think that everyone hopes it will go. So we're kind of all waiting for those people that are skilled enough to make the tutorials to come and help us. But also, I'm sure there's several people that are tinkering with these things right now.
Yeah. We haven't even done like a multiplayer playtest yet.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work to be done, but we're doing it. And once people get on their feet, I think things are going to start iterating very, very quickly. The next topic is they had a live stream this week. Sounds like it's going to be a weekly thing. I highly recommend you watch the full 40-minute live stream just because you get a really good idea of how Epic is thinking and approaching things and what they want from us, because this is really how they're telling us how they want us to approach things.
Yep.
There was a couple of points in the cast that elicited some interesting responses from the community. So one of the things was they were talking about discussions on the forum, and they were saying, yes, let's argue about it, because here at the office we argue pretty extensively about whether the translator should have 4 charges or 5, and everybody in the chat said, oh, it should be unlimited. And it was like, the community has spoken, guys. They don't want their translocator to be limited. It was really funny.
Yeah, we talked about what the purpose of having the limited translocators were. Really, when somebody says they want unlimited translocator, what they're saying is they want the translocator to be able to recharge fast enough that they never notice that there is a charge limit, whether there is or not. The problem that Epic was trying to solve with the translocator,
at least originally,
was that it was too easy to make yourself unattackable, basically. You could try to telefrag somebody and they couldn't even shoot you to stop you from trying to telefrag them.
Yes. But the thing was they fixed that in 2004. I mean, they made it so that you have to wait longer between throws.
Yep.
So there was a charge. But they also made changes like you can shoot at the effect and it will still hurt them.
Yep.
It's a lot harder to actually telefrag people because you actually, the beacon has to be touching them.
Yeah.
And it solved a lot of those problems. But then they went a step further in UT3 and it really hurt.
I think that primarily what they did was slowed down the recharge rate. And I think people just don't like that. In fact, maybe even speeding the recharge rate up from where it was in 2K4 would still be appropriate.
Yeah.
But the point is, maybe it should have limited charges, but the recharge rate needs to be effective and make people feel like they actually have a translocator they can use.
Another point was the TAM thing. So I know we've talked about TAM before, but they asked, are you going to put TAM in? And they said, well, we're not really thinking about it. And I guess that's fair. I guess their focus is going to be just on deathmatch. But at the same time, it was kind of like, this is what people want, guys. Even in the podcast, Flack said that she likes TAM. And then 2 of the other Epic employees said, oh, my favorite mod was Rocket Arena, which is pretty close to TAM. And it has a lot of similarities with TAM. I feel like this is something that should be in the game.
Yeah.
But you know what? If you're in the community and you want to see TAM included, my challenge to you is to go and write it. I mean, the deathmatch code is coming along, and it shouldn't be that hard to extend that into the TAM game type. Make it, do it really well, put in the pull request.
Yep. Well, and the other thing to say on that, too, is that TAM as a name kind of has a negative connotation with some people. It doesn't have to be TAM. I mean, a game type like Rocket Arena, a game type like Clan Arena, a game type like Freon, all these different games that revolve around the same mechanic, which is you try to take out the entire other team to score a point. Team Deathmatch, for all it matters, could have options that make it possible to do this. But I think that most people would agree that because of the way the mechanics of this type of game type, TAM or whatever you want to call it, works, it would be better for it to be its own game type with its own kind of rules. Maybe it's Rocket Arena. Maybe that's
I would love to see something like Rocket Arena, because the thing that was cool about Rocket Arena, 1v1 can be fun, especially if it's in an arena type area where you can't hide, because that's lame. But it was always hard because if it was a server, it was basically you were watching other people and there could be a queue, but that never happened.
Yeah.
Whereas in Rocket Arena, because there was multiple arenas, it was like, if I lose here, I can go and look at 2 or 3 other arenas and get in queue really quickly.
Or I might even already be in queue to start in another one by the time I've lost in one arena. So it was, the rotation was a lot faster, and there was always multiple people in the game, even if it was a server full of 10 people.
But that was always something that in 2003 and in UT3 was something that I was always disappointed that they didn't include, because it just seems like such a no-brainer to me.
Yeah.
And this is another thing that it's like, you know what, guys? The community's opinion on this seems pretty clear. They kind of touched on this in their podcast as well, was they said, we're getting close on the core movement. So this was actually a question that Briz asked, and they...
Yeah, and so just for a point of reference, the reason why I even asked this question was because I wanted to get a sense of how they felt the core mechanics were. Because we kind of have our sense of where they're at and how much work we think still needs to be put into the core mechanics. But I wanted to know how they felt the core mechanics were, because they're actually doing play tests more often than we are and stuff like that. I actually think that it's a good thing that they say that they're getting close on core mechanics, because what that tells me is that some of these superfluous movement ideas, like momentum conservation and sliding and all these different things, are probably not on the table for the core mechanics at this time. So one thing that they brought up was how to argue, because there's a lot of threads still coming up that are like, I loved UT 2004 movement, and I think that this game should be identical to that. Or I loved UT 99 movement, and I think this game should be identical to that.
I think the point that Joe Wilcox was trying to make is that we should argue. A lot of the time we try and say, well, this doesn't matter anymore, this has already been decided, or we know that it's not going to be like that, and why should we be discussing this? Or this is a tired argument. And I think that's really what it's come to now, is this whole UT99 versus 2K4 thing. It's a tired argument. I mean, we've been arguing about this for 12 years, and you would think that we would give it a rest at some point. But the thing is, and the point that we're trying to make is, as long as that conversation is moving forward, then it's good. But make sure that what you're saying is actually moving the conversation forward. If you're making a new thread that brings up the points that people have already made, then there's no use to that.
Well, it doesn't progress the conversation at all. So a good example of that is if you look at the movement property tweaks thread right now, you can see the conversation is moving forward. People are coming in with ideas of, here's how to do this, here's how to make it feel faster, here's how to make it feel more fluid, here's how to do XYZ. And that's actually progressing the conversation. All these threads that are saying, bring back the dodge jump now, at this point in the conversation, we've already hashed out all those details. Everybody's made their case. And if Epic decides next week or next month or whatever to bring the dodge jump back, it won't be because we have kept talking about it over and over and over again. It will be because the people that have been making their case for it came up with a good case.
Right. And going back to the movement properties tweaks thread, people are starting to get really specific. So I feel like that up until now we've said, well, this feels right or this feels good. But now we're starting to get to the point where it's like, this is what property you need to duplicate the movement in UT99. And this is how you duplicate 2K4 or, whatever. And we're starting to get down to specific numbers to say, if you set this number and you increase it by 100, this is the effect that it's actually going to have on gameplay. You increase the base movement speed, it's going to be a little bit harder to hit people with hit scan weapons, for instance. Epic kind of said, we feel close on the core movement. That might be true on, are we going to have special moves? But, in terms of the actual properties, I think we're still a long ways off. I feel like that only now are we starting to get to a point where we can talk about it in real terms. Where we can say this is what the actual effect of it is going to be. And it's taken the community a long time to digest that. And we've only done that for one property. I still don't really know what the value should be for the dodge jump and for the actual jump and for the gravity. I need a reference, and we need to sit down and specifically say, this is how it's actually going to affect the game. So I think this is probably going to be another month. before everybody's explored everything and we can make a decision.
And I agree with that. Like, in terms of feeling like the movement is nailed down, when you start being able to exclude things, like if you do say specifically no dodge jump, just as an example, because nobody has said that.
Yeah. Nobody's said that categorically that it's not going to be.
Okay, so if you do say something like no dodge jump, though, that in effect has a cascading effect on character sizes and level design and stuff like that. If dodge jump comes back whatever form that it's in, it will have an effect on how levels play and stuff like that. And so these are the kinds of things that we're waiting for on the art side before we decide this is what it should look like and this is how it should work. So what we did is we built a couple of strafing tests, just as an example.
Yes.
We took some of the old UT games and compared them to the new movement, and we used the stock standard Steve UT character to do this test because we wanted to show what it was like where Epic has it today.
Right.
And it was really interesting to see the difference between how the UT character and the 2K4 new UT characters moved. One of our strafing tests we did in hardcore mode in UT.
Yep.
And
it's a lot faster.
It's a lot faster. And I don't ever remember playing on a server that was classic movement. And classic movement is the only movement in UT, in original UT, that's slower than any other game.
Yep.
Turbo and hardcore are both faster than every other UT game in existence today.
There was a lot of argument about the values, and I don't really care what the number is. It's faster, and I have video proof. Let's move on to the art. So the next live stream is supposed to be about the art direction. And I have to say this is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, because I basically am responsible for completely screwing up the art direction of Unreal Tournament 2003. So
he feels like he is anyway.
Probably had absolutely nothing to do with it, but at the time that's how it felt. So I made a thread way back in the UT 99 days on the Beyond Unreal forum, and I said, hey, the game is really good, but I feel like the single player experience is not quite all there. You don't really feel like you're in a tournament when you're playing the game. The single player didn't really have like a strong story to it. And so I was proposing to mod UT 99 to include things like, hey, what if there were robots that followed you around? And what if we improved the single player in these ways? And people really liked this idea. Like, everybody was getting together about how we could actually make a mod for this and setting up a website and everything. And then 2K3 came out later and kind of incorporated all these ideas. So that was where we get Gore just like a WWE fighter and is picking up Mohawk kids and throwing them. It was the worst decision in any UT game, period, in my opinion, was the art direction of 2K3. It's really important. I was playing on the pickup games the other day, and that was like the first thing that they were talking about is, every default art asset that wasn't made by the community is complete crap, and we can't stand playing with it. We got to get it right. I hope that we attack this problem from a different direction, and here's what I mean by that. In the past, we've always kind of said, what are we going to make different? Like 2K4 was like we wanted to make it more flashy, I guess. In UT3, there was like, we're going to make it gritty, so they focused on that Necro style, and they really narrowed in on that. But what I want to do is I want to say, what is going to be the same? I really like the look of the ISV cran in the original Unreal, and they used that a lot in Unreal Tournament 99, and I haven't seen that in the other games. That is something that should be the same, that should be included. Let's look at it from what makes UT unique, what did we like about that art style, and keep that.
Yeah.
And make a new version of that.
Yeah. I mean, just to play off of that, GameSpot released a video not too long ago that was called Unreal Tournament is Just the Best.
Yes.
And the guy had planned to talk about all the Unreal Tournament games, but he could not stop talking about the original Unreal Tournament. And one of the things that he harped on the most in that video was just the crazy locations that you went to. There's a level on a conveyor belt. There's a level on a high-speed train moving through the mountains. There's a level on a planet with two castles facing each other. There's a level, around a giant castle completing objectives. Like, the variation in the levels in Unreal Tournament was just incredible, but they all tied together a little bit.
They all felt like part of a cohesive unit.
Exactly. It never felt like you were in a different universe when you went between different levels.
Yes.
And part of the reason for that was, if you look at the areas where they had technology, quote unquote technology, in the levels, they were very much like the technology in Unreal. Now, there's a lot of people that are going to say, well, there's a century between Unreal and UT and all this different stuff. I don't care about all that stuff.
The story, you can make up whatever story you want. I mean, that's we can say that we're rebooting the game and this takes place at the same time as UT99 for all we care. You can make it up. It doesn't matter.
And so my kind of preference on the art direction stuff is, a lot of people have posted screenshots of levels and stuff that they've built. And I really, really like the concept in the shooter game example in Unreal Engine 4, which is kind of a sleeker, cleaner level. But when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that that level can't be dirtied up. Part of me thinks that dirtying things up is still the right direction to go. That was something they talked about in UT3 that everybody made fun of them about, grungification or whatever the heck they called it.
Well, maybe they took it a little too far in UT3, but I think that it was kind of the right direction. I mean, the original UT, everything was supposed to be like former mining locations and stuff. And
see, and that kind of is my problem with the way that UT3 was designed, and especially 2K4 and 2K3, because level descriptions, for example, said that they were designed for bombing, or they were designed for capture the flag, or whatever it was. But in UT, it was like, this was a mineral processing plant that we converted into an arena, and this was a nuclear base that we converted into an arena, and this is whatever that we converted into an arena. So it made it feel like, well, I'm playing in some stupid real location, but they turned it into a level that somehow works. And I think that that's something that you really miss from UT3 and 2K4. The levels just feel like they were designed for some esport, or they aren't even levels, I will say, in the case of UT3. Even though there's great levels in that game, Sentinel, for example, is a really good level, it just didn't feel like...
What is it? Where are we?
Yeah.
I'm in a city somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure what they will get into in the live stream, though, the game has to have an overall gestalt, and that's what they're going to lay out for us. And this is going to be a really iterative process. So I think a really good example is this shock rifle thread that they've got going in the art forum.
Yeah.
It looks great. I'm not sure that it's going to match up with the art direction. And to the artist's credit, when everybody came in and said, hey, I would prefer that you try and incorporate these elements from the original UT99 rifle, he kind of said, hey, I think I can adjust this model to make more people happy. And he's been doing a lot of really great work. And, this could continue to iterate, and maybe he's only a quarter of the way done.
Yeah.
Who knows? But this is going to be something that the community is going to have to create a gestalt, and when everybody's making something completely different, that's a real challenge.
Yeah.
But I think that with iteration and artists being as open as they are right now, that we'll get there.
One thing that I will say on, for example, that shock rifle, is that in UT, the shock rifle was kind of this small, skinny gun, and then in UT3 it turned into this gigantic, bulky blob, and trying to stick with that kind of art direction. So I love the weapons in UT3, but I do feel like, to a certain extent, most of the weapons in UT3 feel like they're huge and bulky. And that's something that I dislike about them. In UT, it felt like you were playing with something that was converted into something. Like, the shock rifle seems like some kind of a laser cutting gun or something that was just converted into a weapon, and the flat cannon feels like a mining gun that was just converted into a weapon. And you could say the same thing probably about a lot of the weapons in UT, but it was because they didn't feel like they were designed specifically to be weapons. They were used as weapons because of their utility.
Yeah, and that just goes back to that, for the story can be anything that we want. And I definitely understand the sentiment from some people that, hey, if this is supposed to happen in the future, it should look slick, and can look more slick. But the question is, what was it about the UT99 look that made it unique? And I don't think that it was just that it was the grunginess, you know? There was a certain way about the way that they drew the lines and the textures that they used that made it unique, that we need to bring into the inspiration.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the low polygon count. I don't have a problem with us upgrading the look of weapons. I think that it's necessary. In fact, the 2K4 shock rifle, I think, is a great example of taking elements of the UT shock rifle and turning it into something that looks completely unique. But what I would like to see in cases like the shock rifle is somebody, and maybe the same person that's doing the current one, to take elements of the UT shock rifle and see how those elements can be upgraded into the kind of style and look that they're going for in the weapon that they've built.
Yeah, so I definitely look forward to seeing that discussion next week. That's all we have time for this week. As always, please leave comments. I particularly love comments on the actual video. We had some really great discussion last week, and I wish we had more time to talk about that, but we had so much discussion in the thread itself that I think that that's sufficient.
Yeah.
But keep it up, guys. I really love what you guys posted last week. And as always, subscribe to our channel and like the video, and we'll see you next week.